Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. This afternoon that is strangely hot today. Yesterday we were somewhat cold, and all of a sudden we are experiencing the heat of Madrid. So thank you for coming this hot afternoon to join us in this conversation between Hisham Matar, Libyan author. I am his publisher. I have published all his books since 2007, and it has been a great pleasure to see him grow, change, evolve, growing more mature, and whatever sorts of verbs that you want to add to the list. And I find this book particularly interesting. And also we have here Nuria Perez. I'm a great fan of hers, and I have the opportunity today to meet her. She has a podcast, Gabinete de Manualidades, and it's very exciting to me. But I think that they're going to find out that they have many things in common, both our speakers today, and I think this will come out in their conversation today. So I hope everyone enjoys this session today.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you everyone for being here with us today. Today, for me, it's a great honor to be here introducing this exceptional writer who is very keen on starting by reading some of his pages of his latest book. I will tell you a bit more about the topic of the book, but we have chosen one page in the book that you can read, and I would like you to listen to the English version read by him, and I would like to read it also in Spanish because he is interested in listening to it into Spanish to see how it sounds in this language.
Thank you for having me. It's very nice to be here, I think the writer is always an intruder between the reader and the book. So to try to temper that intrusion, I thought to just read a few lines, and I'm very glad to be in conversation with Nuria, and she chose these lines. So only love and art can do this. Only inside a book or in front of a painting can one truly be let into another's perspective. It has always struck me as a paradox how in the solitary arts there is something intimately communal, and it suddenly became doubtful to me as we lay in Rome, as indeed it was now standing in the Sala di Nove in Siena, whether I would have written anything or could ever write anything if I had never loved. Implicit in the act of creation is praise, of discovering and naming the world, of acknowledging it, of saying it exists. The French artist Henri Cartier-Bresson had once described taking a photograph as saying yes. Not the yes of approval, but that of acknowledgement. In the end, as it is in the beginning, love and art are an expression of faith. How else to function with the limited knowledge we have? Asked if he was a pessimist, the English playwright Edward Bond replied, "Why am I talking to you if it is not a gesture of hope?" Lorenzetti's Allegory, Caravaggio's David, and indeed the entire history of art can be read as that, a gesture of hope, and also of desire, a playing out of the human spirit's secret ambition to connect with the beloved, to see the world through her eyes, to traverse that tragic private distance between intention and utterance, so that, finally, we might be truly comprehended, and to do this not in order to advocate a position, but rather to be truly seen, to be recognized, not to be mistaken for someone else, to go on changing while remaining identifiable by those who know us best.
Solo el amor y el arte tienen esa capacidad. Solo dentro de un libro o delante de un cuadro podemos verdaderamente acceder a la perspectiva del otro. Siempre me ha parecido paradójico que en las artes solitarias haya algo íntimamente colectivo. Y de pronto, mientras estábamos los dos allí, tumbados en Roma, y también allí, de pie en la sienesa Sala dei Nove, me asaltó la duda de si habría escrito algo o podría haber escrito algo en la vida de no haber amado nunca. El acto de crear lleva implícita la alabanza, el hecho de descubrir y nombrar el mundo, de reconocerlo, de decir que existe. El artista francés Henri Cartier-Bresson afirmó en una ocasión que tomar una fotografía equivalía a decir sí, no un sí afirmativo, sino un sí de reconocimiento. Al final, así como al principio, el amor y el arte son expresiones de fe. ¿Cómo podríamos vivir sino con el limitado conocimiento del que disponemos? Cuando el dramaturgo Edward Bond le preguntaron si era pesimista, contestó: ¿y qué es hablar con usted sino un gesto de esperanza? La alegoría de Lorenzetti, el David de Caravaggio y, en definitiva, la historia del arte al completo puede interpretarse de ese mismo modo, como un gesto de esperanza y a la vez de deseo, como la representación de ese anhelo secreto del espíritu humano de conectar con el ser amado, de ver el mundo a través de sus ojos, de cubrir la trágica distancia que media entre la intención y la expresión, de manera que finalmente, tal vez, puedan comprendernos de verdad, y todo eso no con el propósito de defender una causa, sino para de veras ser visto, para ser reconocido, y que no se nos confunda con otro, para continuar transformándonos sin dejar de ser reconocibles para quienes mejor nos conocen.
Sounds better in Spanish.
Well, thank you. Bueno,
Well, this is a book, a wonderful book. As you can see, it's full of poetry and thoughts that go beyond the story that it tells us about. It's a story of a month in the life of Hisham, where he devotes his time to art. He goes through an event in 1990 where his life is completely changed. His father, who was one of the opponents to the Libyan government and was living in Cairo back then, gets into a prison, is taken to a prison, and they never know anything else about him from that date. He's studying in London, and he finds consolation in the National Gallery, but not just by going to make a tour to the National Gallery just to look at the paintings. He takes a different approach, more systemic approach, and he goes again and again to the National Gallery, where he remains in front of a painting for 1 hour, for 2 hours, and maybe he would even go back to the same painting the following day. And on these tours, he falls in love with the Sienese School of Art, which is an art school that dates back from the 13th century, between the 13th and the 15th century. He finds symbols and certain iconography that are foreign to him, but at the same time they allow him to go back and give closure to his personal story. He tells this story in The Return, his very famous and very much awarded book, where he tells us about how he deals with this incomplete mourning. And after writing this book, he decides, in this sort of limbo between books, to go to Siena and to get to know in person the paintings that had fascinated him so much. And this is the story that we can find in this book. All the thoughts that he found and all the healing that he found through his visits to up to 4 paintings a day. He's very methodic in his approach. As he says, his father sort of dissolved into water, and not having the opportunity of finding closure is something very hard, and you need beauty to find healing. And this is what took you there, to find the beauty of Siena. It took you some time to go to that city. Maybe were you afraid of your expectations not being fulfilled? Maybe you feared that Siena, being in Tuscany, was not one land that would embrace you and that was close to your culture?
I mean, my relationship to Sienese painting is a bit peculiar, because there's no reason really for a 19-year-old to 19-year-old North African boy to be suddenly fascinated by these paintings that are very old and often employ, iconographic symbolism. And so I never really, it was kind of a private fascination, and so Siena over the years started to assume this very charged place. And I didn't want to go unless it was the right time and unless I had the right amount of time to be there. I didn't want to be there for a day or two. I wanted to be there for an extended period. But I think also, I think one of the things that a work of art does when we encounter it at the right moment is that it starts to curate your thinking, and a conversation can develop. Now, that conversation cannot be over a minute, or the international, I should say, average. Somebody did a study, apparently the average is that people stand in front of a painting for 4 seconds on average. And so that's also a conversation, very brief, but it's a conversation. Or sometimes a painting or a book or a piece of music, the conversation can extend over a lifetime, and it can be revisited, and it can present to us new ideas, new questions, new propositions, as we evolve and change. And for me, with Sienese art, it was this extended conversation for a long period of time, where I was sort of interested, then I wasn't interested at all, and then I was really interested, and then I was bored, and then I was, all of these different stages. And then that interest just became far more intense later, and I felt that going to Siena was just the right moment. Those were the explicit reasons, I went to Siena to rest after a period of hard work and to look at these paintings that I've been thinking about. Those were the explicit reasons. But then when I was there, I discovered there was, more to it than that. But, I'm very, I feel a kind of gratitude to those paintings, because I think one of the essential character of art is a kind of generosity. There's nothing more generous, I think, than great art, and generous in both meanings of the word. Giving, but also generates in us ideas and emotions and questions and a conversation. And for me, that month, it was. That was very, went on for a whole month, which was really wonderful. Yeah.
That's a great opportunity. Yeah.
It's a great opportunity. You define Siena as a living being, and all of a sudden you find comfort in the fact that it's a small town, that it has the walls, and the limits are so clear, because in this way you can penetrate the things that you need to solve, and you walk every day from one end to the other in a methodical way. It's a very small town. And do you think that the city really embraced you? Do you think that if these paintings had been anywhere else, your trajectory would have been different, your journey would have been different?
I don't know if you guys know what I mean. I think I hope I'm not the only person who feels this, but how most of the time I am to one side of time. I'm not in time. And there are certain moments when I'm really in time, and those are really beautiful, rare moments and they're usually marked by a kind of ease and surrender, and something, I don't know what it was, but in Siena I was in time the whole time. I always felt everything happened at the right moment, and nothing happened. I was alone. But whatever happened at the right moment. I left the house at the right moment. What I saw, everything I felt very much at the center of my life. And it's not Siena. I don't know, let's not idealize Siena. I mean, and it's not really the paintings. It's something that occurred between me and the city and the paintings and this particular moment in my life that I felt I was somehow being able to be at the center of things for a moment, you know, for a certain extended time.
When in the return you talk about that your father lacks grammar because he doesn't have a past or a present or a future, and that this might have led you to miss the rhythm, the pace of your life. And only when you look at art with your eyes, with that type of look that you give to it, you can find the time. As you mentioned, you have just mentioned about the 4 seconds that everybody stares at a painting for just 4 seconds. How do you think we can actually educate our sight, the way we look at things, so that we can really spend the necessary amount of time in front of a painting?
I mean, you know, those two observations are actually connected, what you say, because you're right. I mean, when you have a situation where somebody very important to you disappears and you don't know if they are alive or dead, and not an abstract way, but in a very vivid way, you think, well, at this exact moment, exactly this time, under the same sun, under the same moon, they are existing somewhere. You know, it complicates your time. It complicates the very details of things. You know, how you eat, how do you put on your clothes, how you bathe, how you sleep. It complicates those things, and that was for me a very long period of time. It was, you know, the majority of my life now, and so it's it makes, yes, the grammar becomes a problem until today. Even though I'm certain now that my father is dead, just through the rules of deduction, you know, there's no evidence, but it's obvious. I still have to pause for a second before I say he was, you know. So his situation in my mind is grammatically complicated, uncertain, and in a sense, this it has a strange connection to what you're saying about how to look, you know. Because, you know, let's face it, if you look at a painting for 4 seconds, nobody can say you haven't seen it, right? You can't say, well, no, you haven't seen it. Of course you've seen it, right? So the question is how to look at a painting. To me, is an open question. I still don't know the answer to that, you know, how to, because they're very deceptive, you know, they're very explicit, and they're there, you know, they usually have a frame around them, and you look at them and you've seen it. But you also know that to really see a painting, something else has to happen, you know. I equally think reading is deceptive, you know. You know, you say I've read a book, which means that you've started in the beginning, you've read every sentence, and when you got to the end of the sentence, you read it, it's done. But we also know that certain books, we need to reread them to really read them, you know. So this question of what does it really mean to pay attention to something, and how the quality of our attention alters our engagement to it, is something that has always fascinated me. And I think there's a connection between the quality of our attention and our ability to cause harm, you know. That, in other words, not wishing to make it a political point at all, but I think there is a connection between justice and attention. That if you pay the right attention to something or someone, it's very difficult for you to, it's not impossible, but it's difficult for you to oppress them, you know. I think, for example, of, you know, this question, the way we talk about immigrants, you know, in Europe, and if you think of the people that cross the sea, it's very difficult to talk about them the way we talk about them if we really paid them attention, you know. If we really had their names. Nobody ever publishes the names, or their ages, or where they were born, or what's their favorite color. You know, these things alter our human response. And in reverse, it's very easy. If you want to forget about something or someone, don't pay them any attention. You know, so this question of attention is much more serious than just, you know, a painting. I mean, a painting is a very serious business in my view, but, you know, it's, you know.
¿Crees que la sociedad está en deber?
Do you think that society, and I'm thinking about children, do you think society is teaching children how to look at things? Sorry.
Hablaba de si crees que
I was saying that if you think that society needs to learn to teach children how to look, or if you think that there's something that each individual needs to learn by themselves, because this is a conversation between one person and the other party, do you think there are any guidelines that we should be given by society? Because nobody talks about how to pay attention to things, and we are bombarded by information that is every day more radical and louder. And nobody teaches us how to differentiate what's useful and what not. And do you think that we should question this at a basic level from the beginning, from the children?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think we should pay attention to paying attention. You know, it's an important thing. But I'm also optimistic about it. You know, I think we all know what it means. You know, we don't. It's great to encourage it, but I think we all know what it means. Like, we all know what it's like when somebody really listens to you. You sound different. You say different things. You find yourself more intelligent with certain people, and you find yourself stumbling with other people and not finding the right words, you know? And some of that, I think, is affected by the quality of attention that we're being paid. You know, and children know much more about this than we think, you know. Also, children are very good at dropping you, you know. They're very good at that. I think it's something I learn from children. It's like when they're not interested, they'll just drop you. I think that's a very good quality.
A veces menos de 4.
Sometimes in less than 4 seconds, they are exposed to just dropping you altogether. You were mentioning before rereading, and I know that you love to reread and that you're also very methodic in this aspect as you are with art. And I was wondering, when I was listening to you talking about rereading, if you find it as important to rewrite. You are one of the writers that are more precise and accurate. Every word is weighted, and I wonder if, like Carver, do you think that writing is rewriting, or if you let yourself go by your instincts, and if writing is a time when you allow yourself to just flow?
I mean, I think most of it is rewriting, absolutely. Very few things sit on the page the way they fall, but some things do, and it's wonderful when that happens. But usually it's rewriting, and I'm very interested in the texture of the prose. You know, it's one of, I mean, if you say what is my central preoccupation, what am I writing about? Or I don't know what I'm writing about, but I know that in my day-to-day, in the doing of it, everything for me is about language. It's all about language. It's about, you know, and everything that means, you know, the texture of it, the ability that if you just organize words in a certain way, you could have a certain kind of effect. It's endless. And as a reader, I am endlessly interested in that, you know. I'm very interested in close reading. I think it's a skill and a practice that I wish more of us were engaged in. It's become a bit out of fashion, you know. We go to books, some of us go to books, or a lot of us go to books to have them account for the things that we already think, or but close reading, genuine close reading, is really uncovering the different layers of meaning in a text, the explicit meaning, but also then the lower, deeper levels of how the sound and the rhythm and the inflections affect us, and how the implied meaning, because most of what language is doing, particularly very high art, in high literary art is doing, is that everything it's doing is about the unsayable. It's organizing a set of words in order to reach for the thing that doesn't have words, So this activity is, for me, is it's really endlessly fascinating, and very, very rich.
So going back to the topic of the look and your discipline when it comes to looking at things, you have sometimes told the story of a master. Hello, can you hear me?
Well, very interesting. I'm not hearing anything.
Ahora, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Maybe the channel has been offset. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm testing the sound.
We invite him here for 5 minutes and he breaks them. Oh, thanks. Oh, this is even fancier. All right. Okay.
Can you hear me now? Wonderful. So, I was saying, I've lost my thoughts, but we were talking about the way of looking at things, and I remember that you've mentioned a master of yours or a teacher of yours when you were a child, that told you that going to nature for him was like praying, and the way that you visit a museum and you look at the works of art is very spiritual. And it calls my attention that despite the fact that this is so spiritual and so intimate, you choose some iconography that is completely removed from your personal story and your personal history. Do you think this works well like this? Do you think that you could be as intimate and that you could also return to your inner self through art if the iconography, if the symbols were closer to your own culture? Or do you think that the fact that you're somewhat foreign to it helps you dig into yourself?
I'm not sure about spiritual. I don't know if I feel any kind of spiritual connection to these paintings or to... It's something else. It's like... basically, it's the opposite of carelessness. I think great art is the opposite of every careless act. It's a very intense, concentrated space where somebody over a long period of time has invested so many things: skill, technical prowess, emotional life, psychological life, intellectual life, taste. So many things are captured in this place and held very in a way where they're mobile, that it's not static. It's always moving, is always open to interpretation. It's always wanting you to help finish it or complete it. And it's always filled with variance. That's very much the case with my biggest love, with literature. Very much the case, all of that, right? None of us have read the same book, right? No. We've all read different books, and so I think that's really what I'm fascinated by. I find it a very dynamic place. As for, yes, you're right. It's a bit curious that I'm so moved by these paintings. Some of my friends who grew up Catholic look at these they can't really look at these paintings. They look at them and they're reminded of things that they don't like, or something that they don't they're a bit surprised by my passion for them, and some of them I have managed to convert into looking at the paintings maybe in a different way, but to me these Sienese paintings, yes, of course they are about religious iconography, and I grew up with a culture that introduced me to this. I grew up with the Virgin Mary and with Christ through the Muslim tradition, so it wasn't entirely foreign to me, but I look at these paintings and I don't think Duccio and Simone Martini and the Lorenzetti brothers and Giovanni Di Paolo and all these incredible painters that were going off one another, learning from one another. Perhaps some of them occasionally were inspired by a kind of spiritual faith. But those paintings are really about human life. They're really interested in what is it really like to be a mother, and to be a son, and to be that mother and that son. What is that really like? And what can I do with the painting? To what extent can I rely on a mutual confederacy between me and a stranger that can stand in front of a painting and invest some of herself into it, So all that, they're really thinking on that level. And then just beyond all of that, I genuinely proceed on the assumption that all of it is mine, and I encourage my students to think that way. All of human culture is mine. I'm very moved by being a human being. I hope I take it seriously, whether it's Al-Mutanabbi or Ibn Arabi or Ibn Rushd or Al-Ma'arri, which I'm very sad nobody reads Al-Ma'arri anymore. I think he's a wonderful poet. Al-Ma'arri wrote Risalat al-Ghufran. In English, the translation is the Epistle of Forgiveness, which tells the story of a poet. This is 200 years before Dante. Tells the story of a poet that descends to the underworld. But Al-Ma'arri's poet also goes to the heavens, because his main preoccupation is he wants to know who wrote the first poem, and he wants to interrogate Adam. He thinks Adam wrote a poem. He thinks Adam wrote an elegy to his son, and maybe an elegy for both of his sons, the killed and the killer. And then he discovers that Eve also wrote a poem. But Eve's poem wasn't an elegy, it was about the future. It's a lovely idea that the first poem was an elegy. Maybe this is why every time we are heartbroken, we turn to poetry, And Eve's poem was prospecting. It was about the future. So it doesn't take, much looking into for you to come to the conclusion that all of this is connected, that Al-Ma'arri and Dante and that these Sienese paintings we're talking about and the Eastern Church and there's a culture is much more dynamic than for us to think about it in nationalistic sort of ways. And so I think it's all mine, and it's all ours, and I'm very honored by that. I'm very ashamed of being a human being, but I'm also very proud of being a human being. I'm genuinely, nothing breaks my heart more than being a human being, but also nothing gives me more joy, It's certainly the most interesting thing that has ever happened to me. It's just because it involves you into such a complexity. Imagine that your brother, not in an abstract way, that your brother and your sister are capable of the worst possible things. That the worst murderer or the worst criminal you could imagine is your brother. but also that Virginia Woolf is my sister. I mean, imagine that, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and etc., etc. You know, it's very complicated inheritance, and I think an active engagement with that inheritance, with the complexities of it, it goes back to our point about paying attention.
Yeah.
You know, because it's really important. Yeah.
In a letter to Lowell, Einstein said that nothing can overpass the psychological effect of art on people. You were mentioning that there are so many types of works of art as there are people approaching this art. And so to what extent the value of a work of art depends on the life and the emotional background of the person looking at it?
I think so much. And I also have this is an article of faith, meaning I can't prove it, you know. But I'm convinced this is the case. I'm convinced that every painting, when you go to the Prado and you stand in front of, say, Poussin's the Triumph of David, for example, or any painting, the painting has retained something of everyone that has stood in front of that painting. So everyone that stood in front of the painting and genuinely looked at it left something of themselves in it. So a painting isn't a passive thing that's just hanging on the wall. I think paintings are working, you know, they're really working on us and working for us, and they alter our culture, you know, and books too, of course, very much. They're not anything but passive. Yeah, and so it's both how we go to them, but also the accumulative effect of our attention on them. You know, I think is also very interesting and very hard to measure.
En el libro.
In your book, you mention Marcus Aurelius when he says, "Love those things that you go back to." Love is about coming back, going back.
I have no idea what love is. It's I think it must be on some level a return, but I'm not sure. I think yeah, that's a very difficult question. What do you think?
I believe that when you think about going back as in going back home, I think that the love that we feel in a home, whether it's outwards or inwards, this is what we what makes us touch some glimpses of happiness. And I think that to touching joy is inhabiting that feeling of being home, that it can give you the experience of going back. And I think this is something that you talk about in your book, The Return, but you also talk about how to get yourself into a work of art is about going back to your own world and not going to visit other worlds. And I find it fascinating that this is quite counterintuitive when we consider what we're taught in a Catholic society, because we have been taught that the path to transcend goes through suffering, and the person that has to overcome the most ugliness will reach the kingdom earlier than those who choose beauty. And I think that I found somewhat consolation in your book, the fact that we can, by accepting the beauty that we receive, can make us grow.
Yes, I mean, I think it's I think ultimately these works are interested in pleasure, you know, because otherwise it doesn't really make sense why they give so much delight, you know. I think art, yes, on some level is entertainment, but it's much more than that. But it is often, not always, but it's often fascinated by pleasure and these things that we're talking about, the connections between pleasure and attention and thought and intellectual life, and they're very delicate things that great works of art are engaged with. Not all of them, but many of them.
Hay otra parte.
There's another part in your book that I find very interesting. It's a thought about what happened to society when they had to face life after the Black Death, and I'm very curious about about knowing if the pandemic was already on when you wrote that part, and to what extent do you think it affected us? Because you mentioned that Black Death also killed imagination, because people were too busy feeling guilty because they thought that this was God's punishment. This has not happened now. Nobody thinks that God has sent us COVID, but I believe that culture has been hit by the pandemic. And I thought all of a sudden maybe Hisham couldn't go to a museum for over a year and a half. How could he survive? And beyond that, as a society, how do you think it has influenced us that we could not look outside of ourselves?
I mean, it was very uncanny, because I wrote the book in 2018, and I knew that if I'm going to write about Sienese art, I have to pay attention to the Black Death, because it was a moment that really changed art. In one of his letters, Michelangelo says that everything I do has the stamp of death on it. That somehow the Black Death had privileged death in the minds of a lot of thinkers and artists. They thought that is really the subject, and one has to contend with it and think carefully about it. But as I write in the book, the responses differed. They weren't just that. There's Ibn Khaldun writes about the Black Death. He was very affected by it. He lost his parents to it, and he was being a historiographer and arguably the founder of sociology. He was very interested in this. The effects of the Black Death on society. And Ibn Khaldun is very unusual, because he set off to write a history of the Berber people, native inhabitants of North Africa. But he thought, no, before I write the history of these people, I want to write an introduction. And in this introduction, I want to think about historiography. I want to think about what it is to write a history. And he wrote the introduction over and over and kept rewriting it over a very long period of time. And it really became his masterpiece, the introduction. And I think about, the connections between the Black Death and this desire to revisit and to reintroduce and to think about time that Ibn Khaldun became so fascinated with. So the Black Death had kind of a wide range of things, but of effects, and I only touch on a little bit of it. But I'm also interested in how we are very good at not paying attention, as we said, and forgetting, but we're also very good at being marked by our history. So the Black Death, the memory of the Black Death is in all of us. And so when the pandemic came, some of our responses had to do with the Black Death and other pandemics before. So I'm very interested in this sort of stratified human memory, that is felt in the body almost. It's not logical or at least conscious. But of course, we don't want to be dramatic. There's a big difference between COVID and the Black Death. But certainly, I think COVID has altered. I mean, I still don't know. I'm observing. I don't like to guess too much, but from what I can see, it has changed subtle things in us. I notice, for example, this is all anecdotal, but I noticed that a lot of people I know, it altered their sociability. Their appetite for social life is slightly different, not dramatically so. And I noticed more a difference in the younger generation, because it was, it said, 3 years is a lot of time in anybody's life, but when you are 18 or 15, it's a very long time. Yeah.
What has replaced this trip to Siena? What is your routine nowadays? Do you still go visit the National Gallery? Are you visiting other galleries? What is fascinating you at this time?
I mean, I'm a very predictable person. I write every day. It's really the way that I don't know what to do with the world. Maybe you guys know and can tell me, but I don't know what to do with the world. And what I do with the world is I write. This is how I think about things. So that's really the center of my life. But I go to see pictures in the old way. Yes, I go regularly, and sometimes I write about a picture. And these days I'm thinking a lot about Tiziano. Just because I find them so endlessly interesting, and so maybe I'm thinking maybe I'll write something on it. But you're catching me in a moment when I'm feeling very frivolous because I've just finished a book, so I feel like I can just play and waste my time for a week or two, and then I'll be back in my work.
Bueno, vamos a ir.
Well, we're going to open the Q&A, but before we go into that, I would like you to listen to Hisham again. And before that, before we close for today, I would like to remind a sentence of DJ Lawrence that said that each artist is the salvation for another artist. And I think that for you, all the Sienese artists have been part of your salvation, but I know that there are many people who are finding healing and salvation and a way back in your book, just as you have within the Sienese artists. And I would like to finish with the last paragraph of the book, which is very powerful. Would you like to read it first?
Well, actually, why don't you start first?
¿Yo?
Yes.
Vale. Queremos que nos vean y a la vez redescubrir nuestra propia capacidad de recordar y finalmente encontrar el consuelo que media entre la intención y la expresión, entre el sentimiento oculto y su forma exterior. El cuadro lo sabe que lo que más deseamos, incluso más que el paraíso, es que se nos reconozca, que por mucho que el tránsito nos haya transformado y transfigurado, quede algo de nosotros que siga siendo perceptible para quienes hemos amado durante tanto tiempo. Tal vez toda la historia del arte consista en el despliegue de esa aspiración. Puede que todo libro, pintura o sinfonía sea un intento de proporcionarnos una crónica fiel de todo lo que nos concierne.
So this is a passage that concerns a painting by Giovanni Di Paolo called Paradise, and there's a detail in that the Paradise it's organized with these couples in the hereafter who are holding hands and looking at each other. He has them all set like that, a reunion of sorts, and one of the couple. I think, I have no proof of it, but the way he represented them reminded me of Héloïse and Abélard, the nun and the monk who exchanged these very passionate love letters that Giovanni Di Paolo was familiar with. That must surely be the ambition of every reunion, not only to identify and be identified, but also to have an accurate account of all that has come since the last encounter. And it must surely follow that what lies behind our longing and nostalgia is exactly this need to be accounted for. It is as if what Di Paolo is thinking here is that a true hell is not the hell of fire, but of not being recognized by those closest to us. We want to be seen by them and, in turn, rediscover our own powers of remembrance, and to finally find the consolation that lies between intention and expression, between the concealed sentiment and its outward shape. The painting understands this. It knows that what we wish for most, even more than paradise, is to be recognized. That regardless of how transformed and transfigured we might be by the passage, something of us might sustain and remain perceptible to those we have spent so long loving. Perhaps the entire history of art is the unfolding of this ambition, that every book, painting, or symphony is an attempt to give a faithful account of all that concerns us. Thank you. Thanks. All right, now your turn. You know, this is my favorite moment in these events. When there's a question and nobody says anything, I like it. So we can stay like this for a bit.
Hola. No sé si hacerlo en inglés.
I don't know if I should ask this question in English or in Spanish.
Well, yeah.
Here, well, thank you. Both of you. I normally come here because I find very interesting the people who come here, and it's an opportunity for me to learn new things, and this is the case. So thank you for that. And well, I just wanted to say that I don't really have a question, but first I thought about one, so I can make it. It was that when you went to Siena, you already had in your mind that you wanted to write the book, or the situation inspired you to write it?
Well, thank you very much for what you said. I'm glad you came. I went to Siena after I finished a book I wrote called The Return, which is, every book you write demands certain things from you, at least in my case. I feel that the books I write are my fate, in a sense. And a book comes with its appetites. It comes with its taste also, and places gradually, at least in my case, as I work on it, its demands on me become more and more comprehensive and organize my life. And so at the end of a book, there's always this strange moment, like now, I've finished a book recently, so you feel slightly unemployed, but with that book, The Return, it was much more that feeling, because it was much stronger, because it was a book that I felt was written out of my veins. It was and a book that I wasn't really sure I could pull off. And so having finished it, I felt a kind of I felt victory and defeat at the same moment, and so I went to Siena just to have time there and do something pleasurable. I had no intention. For the first time in my life, I decided not to work for a month. I've never done that, and so I didn't go there to work, but I kept a diary. And when I got back to my life and to London, and from time to time I would think about that time in Siena, and I would look at the diary thinking, no, it wasn't really that powerful. And when I look at the diary, I think, no, actually it was, it was very significant. And I thought, one day maybe I will write about it, or maybe I will use it as part of another work, or I had no clear idea. And 2 years later, having, being deeply involved in another project, I went to Siena in a different kind of context for a couple of days, and I felt that a mist was being drawn over the Siena that I had, the experience that I had, and that perhaps I should write this book now because it might not be as present in my mind. So I wrote it 2 years after the visit.
I read your book and I felt that it was a constant search within your life, that it got repeated again in Siena, the search of these painters. In that dialogue that you have with the work of art, in that empathy that comes about, do you think that the work is actually completed, or are there always open questions, open endings?
No, I would say the latter. If anything, I think the longer I stand in front of the painting, the more uncertain I become about it. The more various its nature is. So, for example, a painting that I write about here, the first painting I write about is the first painting that really engaged me of Sienese art. Is by Duccio, and it's the healing of the blind, and I still think a lot about that painting, about what it's saying, about what it is to really see, and when you can see, you know that you're being seen, and so the painting, I think, is interested in the social implications of seeing and being seen, and so no, I think over time things, but also I think it's true with intimacy, isn't it? I mean, the people that we know best are also the people that can be the most mysterious to us, So there's something, I think, about the nature of intimacy with something that can enrich it,
Yeah?
I think there aren't any more questions, but don't you forget that you can ask Hisham to sign your books. He will be delighted to dedicate a copy to you. It's been an honor, Hisham. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Nuria. Thanks.